Alright, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to scan your pinhole photograph as well as crop it, flip it, and colorize it. You should have a copy of the handout that kind of goes back over this. I know that handout's very dense. It's really just there for reference. So this video is probably better to learn it, especially if you weren't in class when I demonstrated. The first thing I have to do is hook a scanner into the computer, which you're not actually seeing on this video. But once it's hooked in, provided the driver is installed, which it should be, it should kind of have a blinking blue light on it, and you should be able to put your pinhole photograph face down, upside down on it, and then you're going to go to File, Import, WIA Support after opening Photoshop. I should probably mention that Photoshop is in the Start menu. If you don't see it on your desktop, and you just go to Start, All Apps, and then Adobe Master Collection CS 5.5, and then Adobe Photoshop CS 5.1. It really doesn't matter which one of those you use. At any rate, File, Import, and then WIA Support, provided the scanner is properly connected and the driver's installed. This should come up, you hit start, and then you should see your scanner right there and hit OK. When you see this screen, sometimes people will do a preview of their scan. You don't really need to worry about doing that, but I would hit this adjust the quality of the scanned picture and change the resolution to 300, and that is from 100. Do not change it to grayscale. Keep it in color, or else you're gonna hit a roadblock where you have to mess with mode. So it's gonna be color anyway, since I didn't change it from that and I did custom settings. At that point, I just hit scan, and it'll just take it a second here. These portable scanners don't need to warm up the way a larger one would. It does take a little longer if you're doing higher resolution. Alright, and here it is. So that's step one completed. I scanned my photo. Step two is to crop the photo. To crop it, I'm going to use the crop tool, which is the 5th tool down. Click the crop tool. It's a good idea to be in the habit. First of all, anytime you're using a tool in Photoshop, you have options for that tool right up top here. Underneath File, Edit, Image, and all those menus that pop down, you have a small bar of options, and sometimes people will, for instance, want to crop something at 8.5 by 11, which means if you try to crop, it's going to lock your proportions to 8.5 by 11. Which you probably don't want. It's not going to hurt anything here, but I'll just redo the crop. So basically, you look up top and hit clear to clear the values that might be there. And then I'm going to go over here. I'm going to crop this. I am cutting a little bit of the edge off just because I'm not really worried about that. I'd rather cut it off than have extra. It's not a big deal. If you happen to have a photo that has like tons of sky or ground and you want to cut some of that fat and cut down to the meat of it, then you can do that. Once you put your crop box around it, you're going to hit enter. That was the sound of me hitting enter. And then it probably is a good idea to use the zoom tool, which is this little magnifying glass at the bottom here. So if I click zoom a few times, if I click zoom a few too many times, I can always hold Alt and click again to zoom out. So Alt is good to remember. It allows you to Alt and Shift both kind of change basic properties of whatever tool you're using. More on that in a little bit. All right, now the next thing I'm going to do is invert the photo. In other words, I'm going to make this negative that looks kind of like a B-movie nightmare into a positive. So I go to Image, Adjustments, and Invert. And that's all I have to do. When I do that, it turns the darks light and the lights dark. And other than being black and white and also being backwards, probably looks exactly like what the photographer saw when they took the picture. Now, the stop sign says POTS, so that is because, once again, with pinhole photography, the light doesn't bend as it goes through the pinhole, so the light that's coming from above goes right through the pinhole at that angle and strikes the paper at the bottom of the camera. Light coming from the left strikes it to the right. So correcting the fact that it's actually upside down and backwards. Correcting the upside down part of it is easy because you just turn the paper upside down or right side up. Correcting backwards is a little harder, but we're in Photoshop, so it's not that bad. We're just going to flip it. So if I go to image rotation, and then I go flip canvas horizontal, now my stop sign says stop, or my pot sign says stop. Okay, now this next thing is mentioned somewhere on the handout, but it is worth noting that you might, let's say you didn't get a 5. Let's say you got a 4 or a 6 or something like that in terms of your exposure. You may want to play with brightness contrast a little bit. To do that, you're going to go Image, Adjustments, Brightness, Contrast, and then you can pretty easily see what these do. Brightness up and down, contrast up and down. So you don't really have to mess with this unless you feel like you're going to need to. One thing I will say is pure black and pure white, although they're good to have, you're not going to really see color changing on those. So if you do need to adjust contrast, sometimes if you take the contrast down and then, take brightness up or down depending on if it's like lighter or darker, just so that you get kind of like still a good healthy range of grays, but the more solid black you have, the less you're going to be able to colorize your picture, and same with solid white. Again, that's an optional step in most cases, but it may help and may give you more options with how you color things. Okay, at this point I am ready to start coloring. So I'm going to use my selection tools, and there are 3 categories of selection tools. They are not the very top tool, but the second, third, and fourth tools. The first of my selection tools is the marquee tool. Generally looks like a dotted line box, and the marquee tool basically selects based on a predefined shape. However, in this case, that's probably not going to apply to anything. Even if I have a rectangle in my photograph, it's probably not going to be a perfect rectangle like this. These have more implications for, basic graphic design than they do for photo manipulation. So generally, you're going to leave the marquee tool alone. The next one down is the lasso tool. And there are a few different lasso tools, same with marquee tools. Those are accessed by clicking and holding on that tool. So I'll do that again. Right now I'm on the regular lasso tool. If I click and hold, I can pick between regular lasso, polygonal lasso, or magnetic lasso, which I'm just going to tell you to leave alone for now. So the other two you can use just fine. And I'm going to go ahead and start with the regular lasso tool. So the regular lasso tool is used to draw a selection, and what I'm going to do with this lasso, because there are a lot of organic curves here, I'm going to use this lasso to select this car. And this tool selects based on you drawing, and being that I have a very steady hand, I'm sure you're enthralled to watch me perfectly draw the outline around this car until all of a sudden I go and get way extra. But that's okay. I return to the car and I'm doing fine until I suddenly forget an entire bottom chunk of the car, including its wheels. So I did that on purpose just to illustrate the fact that this tool is not just for people with steady hands or high drawing skill levels. This tool can be used in conjunction with Shift and Alt, and you can kind of sculpt the drawing of your selection bit by bit. In other words, I got a big chunk right here that I don't want. I just want this to go back to the car. So what I can do, and make sure you're watching the icon closely, if I hold Alt, it's tiny, but there's a little minus sign that appeared. You might have to have this full screen on a decent sized device to see it. I'll do it again. I hold Alt, I'm wiggling the lasso tool, and Alt 3, 2, 1, there it is. So while I'm holding Alt, I can, and I really don't care about this out here, I'm subtracting from my selection, but none of this is, selected, so I'm subtracting from that which is already gone, so it's not going to do anything. But when I hit the car, I'm going to start to try to be a lot more exact. So I'm going to go right along that line, and then I'm going to make a big circle around the stuff I didn't want, and when I let go, it cuts that part off. The reverse is true of Shift. I'm wiggling. I'll do it near the stop sign. Suddenly I'm going to hit Shift, and there's a little tiny plus sign there. And again, if I add inside the selection, it's not going to do anything. But if I start inside the selection and then go outside of it like that, and that, then I can add to my selection. So you could really, I'm not going to worry about it here, but you could really get in there and like fine tune things if you wanted to. You can zoom while a selection is active. I'm pretty good. I am going to show one thing that I'm not going to do consistently throughout here, and this is not required of the pinhole colorization exercise, but when I have something selected and I'm still on my selection tool, there's a button at the top where my tool options are that says Refine Edge. And if I click that button, it shows just the thing that I have selected. And one little trick that is often a good thing to do when you're manipulating photographs is to adjust the feather. If I take the feather up significantly, this starts to seem as though the car is emerging from a dream. And generally, unless that's what you're going for, you don't want that. But what this is going to do is it's going to change how hard the edge is. If I have no feather, it's going to have maybe kind of a hard digital edge that, considering the general blurriness of the photo, might look kind of unnatural and like artificially digitized. So if I increase the feather a little bit, the colorization that I do here may sort of visually sink in a little bit better and integrate better with the image. And essentially I hit OK and it doesn't really look any different. But now when I make changes to this, which is essentially me colorizing it, in fact selections in general are you telling the program this is the part I want you to change. So I'm going to go ahead and change the color. I'm going to Image, Adjustments, Color Balance to do this. It's worth noting that when you hit color balance, this thing comes up with these sliders. They might look a little bit like this RGB stuff up here, but they're not the same thing. So we're keeping things simple, and we're just going to do image adjustments, color balance. And basically, if I want this to be a red car, I can just pull up the red. Now, granted, the entire thing is red. If I was going for pure realism, which is not important for you, unless you want it to be, I probably would have the windshield be a little different, the front grille be a little different, and things like that. But I'm not too worried about that here. I can combine these, and I can also go over to highlights and shadows. So if I want to make this like the most obnoxiously, disgustingly pink car possible, I can take it pretty far by using different tone balances at the same time. And once I'm happy with it, I'm going to hit OK. It's worth noting that the car is still selected, and whenever anything is selected, you can only manipulate that thing. So I have to deselect. Some selection tools, like the lasso tool, I can just click and it deselects if I just click away from my selection without holding Shift or Alt. Other times, you may want to go up to the Select menu and just pick Deselect. Or actually, if you look in the menu off to the right, it says Control D, which means, you can't see me do this, but if I hold Control and hit D, it deselects. So I'm going to go ahead and select the stop sign next. For this one, I'm going to click and hold on the lasso tool, and I'm going to pick the polygonal lasso tool. Polygonal lasso works similarly to the lasso except for one thing. If I click and just let go, I've got this stretchy line. And at this point, you might be able to guess how this works. Basically, if I'm going to select the stop sign, which is relatively geometric or polygonal, then I can just go over to here and click, and then go over to here and click, and then here and click, and here and click. I'm just going to follow along that. And then when I return to my starting point, once again, it's teeny tiny like the plus and minus signs, but I get this little circle that tells me that it can see the starting point, and it's assuming I want to close the selection. So I have another selection. If I wanted to, I could refine the edge. Like I said, I'm not going to worry about that, but once again, I click the button, and then, I guess I'll do it. Click the button, and then I just pull up feather a little bit. And then I hit OK, and then I'm going to go, once again, Image, Adjustments, Color Balance, and why not just turn this red? And hit OK. Once again, to deselect, I'm going to hit Control D. And for the last one, I'm going to kind of zoom out a little bit. For the last one, I'm going to show the third category of selection tools, which involves the quick selection tool. It also has the magic wand tool underneath it, which selects things mainly based on color. Since we don't have a lot of color here, I'm just going to say don't really worry about that one yet. We'll use it in the future. But for now, I'm just going to use quick selection tool. Quick selection also selects based on color, but it's more about finding edges. It's sort of finding like differences of color and especially contrast, which means in a low contrast situation, you know, if I'm trying to pick this car out from that car, I probably don't want to use this. But in a high contrast situation, like the sky versus the trees, it might work great. The way this tool works is instead of drawing a line, you actually just kind of, you know, click in the middle of whatever you're trying to select and start swathing it around, and it'll start jumping. And in fact, it jumped pretty far just then to encompass the entirety of the sky. Now, it got a little bit of stuff that I didn't want, which means, once again, I'm going to hold Alt to subtract from the selection. I'm just going to click right in the middle of the stop sign, and it did a pretty good job of finding it. Now, there's some other stuff that I don't necessarily want that's really, really skinny. One thing I can try is I can try up here changing the brush size of this selection tool to something really small, and then holding Alt and eliminating, for instance, this from it. But that's probably not going to work very well, you see, for that lamppost. Now, the lamppost might be small enough that I'm not really worried about it. I'm just going to put that back. So it is worth noting that this tool defaults to always adding. So usually when I use this tool, I just ride the Alt key when I want to subtract and then let go of it when I want to add. So down here I can add things that aren't attached to my selection. I can go in and try to kind of you know, go back and forth on this tree stuff just a little bit. Something like that, and kind of add in the... I'm sorry, take out the little chunks of tree that are clearly going to get in the way. And for demonstration purposes, I'm not really going to go completely crazy doing this. It is worth noting that I could always, without deselecting, I could always just go back in with the lasso tool. Sometimes that's what you need to do, is go in with the lasso tool and add little tiny pieces to the selection, like here and here, something like that, or subtract them from. That's what I was trying to do. Sometimes it can get a little confusing whether you're adding or subtracting. I could even, if I was getting really nitpicky, which I won't do, but I could even go in with the polygonal lasso tool and use it to take this like lamppost and part of the stop sign out of the selection. In fact, I will just go ahead and do it with the stop sign. So I'm just gonna hold Alt and just cut that part from it. Okay, good enough. I'm not going to mess with her fine edge. In fact, I'll specifically won't do it so you can see that it will look a little more digital. And then I'm going to go Image, Adjustments, Color Balance, and I'm going to turn the sky blue. Just kidding, I'm going to turn it like weirdly green. That is to say that I am not picky about you being realistic with your colors. If you want to go that route, you can. But it can look crazy. It also does not have to entirely be colored. What I expect to see, I didn't do quite enough here. I would expect to see 5 specific things selected and then manipulated in terms of color. One last thing, it is worth noting that I am not, you know, for instance, if I wanted to turn these trees, you know, super bright green, I am not going to go in with my brush tool and color them green. You see how dumb that looks? It looks dumb because it's just like completely erasing all detail and value from underneath. So this isn't going to work that way. That's Microsoft Paint, like baby stuff. So I'm going to undo both of those things. I can either hit undo or I can hit Alt-Control-Z multiple times to just keep jumping backwards in time, about 20 steps. Once I'm all finished, so we're pretending that I've done at least 2 more things for a total of 5 colorized items. Once I'm all finished, I'm going to go to File, Save As. I'm going to go to the shared drive. this PC building share central student, and then Elin Digital Arts period X. And then finally, I am going to find the pinhole colorization folder, and I'm going to go ahead and type my first and last name, and then I'm going to hit save. The format is worth noting, although this format is perfectly fine. It's going to default to bitmap when it's a scan. You can always change it to JPEG if you want to, which is, you know, a lot of the time when we're dealing with flat images. That's what we often use. When you're done, you hit save. Sometimes if it's a lossy file like a JPEG where it compresses it, it's going to ask you how big or small you want the file to be. And I would just say, no matter what, even if it's a little exercise like this, just be in the habit of taking this slider all the way up to large file, and then you can hit OK. And that's it. For questions or review, you can consult the handout, or certainly you can ask me in class. Good luck.